theology nerds. This is Trip, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity, where since the year of 2008, we've been bringing you interviews with scholars from across the academy, philosophers, theologians, biblical scholars, scientists, and today you get a philosopher, Myron Penner. He is a professor of philosophy at Trinity Western University. That would be in Canada. And he's also become a very, very dear friend. And so this conversation has all the vibes of a friend convo. I love Myron. He's part of a group that I met when I was part of a theopsych research gathering. And there's like a cluster of friends that met there. Me, Sari, Dan Koch, Sarah Lane Ritchie, Myron. The five of us have managed to stay sane and friends during lockdown by high-quality Zoom hangouts. Oh, yeah. And in fact, some of them have been on members-only podcast episodes. If you are a member of Dan Koch's podcast, you have permission. We do audio commentary to a Christian camp movie. We discuss the Enneagram, and I basically talk about Lord of the Rings the whole time. Anyway, we're really good friends, and it was just fun to get to have a conversation without everyone else there, and then we kind of get nerdy, but also get personal, and really, I just want to introduce him to all the homebrewed listeners, because I love Myron, even though you'll see we have a lot of maybe divergent opinions, or definitely interest, probably not significant opinions. He's like a high quality Mennonite. Anyway, so yeah, I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Myron. So I hope you enjoy it. And before we jump in, just know, of all the Canadian Mennonites I know, and there's at least one, Myron is my favorite. Yeah, and anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy this episode. And remember, if you like the podcast, you can support it. Go to homebrewedcommunity.com. When you join, you get an ecclesiastical title. That's right. It doesn't come with a lot of power, but it does give you access to the Homebrewed Facebook group, the private members-only podcast feed where you get access to all sorts of our past class and goodies, but you also get to go to bed every night saying, I am one of the elect, the people that help bring nerdy conversations to the masses. So, check it out, Homebrewed Community. And my buddy, my friend Myron. Here's Podcast Air Hug. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and on the podcast is my friend Myron. How are you doing today, Myron?
I'm doing well, Trip. How's it going?
Well, I get to see your face on a screen, so I'm kind of peeking. I'm peeking. And earlier today, I got to see Sarah and baby Rowan, and I feel like multiple adult friends in the same day. Like that's like so 2019.
This is the light at the end of the pandemic tunnel. Is it starting to shine through into the Hobbit hole?
I don't know if it's got down here yet, but at least outside today, it was shining.
Yeah. I'm looking at the screen and I'm seeing your kind of brick, wood beam, kind of Hobbit kind of whole interior, comparing it to my kind of like white walls, white shelves, whiteboard, kind of, modernist kind of lines. And I'm thinking, it's an interesting visual juxtaposition. Yeah.
Well, now people are going to say that was the highlight of the podcast, was the description of your video backgrounds. Yeah. But we've spent a lot of time hanging out as friends, and we have a group of friends that all met at the theopsych event a couple years ago, and while we were there, doing theology and psychology, we went on our first date to a movie premiere.
We did.
Faculty, why did you say yes to? We didn't know each other, and for some reason you got suckered into going out to a movie premiere with someone you just met. What was that like? That was pretty adventurous, right?
It was. I'm trying to recall the circumstances. Clearly I've been drinking a lot, so No, I think the way it worked is I had connected with Dan and Sarah a little bit, and I think you and I maybe said hello, once or twice, but didn't really know you at all, other than kind of hanging out in your room. I guess a couple evenings. We had started to hang out.
I decided I hadn't located you in the same groups that I'd located other people in.
Ooh, I consider that to my advantage, probably.
Yeah. I was like, he's Canadian. He can't be that bad.
He can't be that bad. And so then the opportunity to go to a Hollywood premiere, and you seem pretty connected. And I thought this is great cultural learning from a Canadian to kind of come and observe this phenomenon of the American experience, the movie premiere. And like from the word go, it was a great night from my perspective.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. And I just don't understand how after that experience, you didn't end up going to dance lessons with me and Sarah and Justin Barrett. For some reason we get there and then Dan disappears to go get food and like misses the opportunity. And by the end of the night, I'm dancing with old ladies. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, there was some conflict I had in my schedule. I couldn't go out with the dancing, but that's one of my regrets, actually. So I'm hoping at some point in the future we'll be able to recreate that moment, and wow. You can take me out dancing. That can be our next date. Okay,
date number 2, we go dancing, and by the end of the night, we're both dancing with elderly women at a Shriners Club. But so now you're Canadian, you're a Mennonite, you're a philosopher, you're a dad. And I've heard all sorts of cool stories. You like to you like to make smoked sausages, Mennonite style.
Yeah.
Like, what's something I don't know about you that you think, oh, if he hears this, he'll know more about me, and then the people listening will be like, oh, that's awesome.
Got arrested for streaking across a Purdue football game. They were playing Notre Dame and it just won. And I went buck naked right across the 50-yard line, tackled by 8 security guards, beaten to a pulp by the batons that they slammed the world's biggest drum with. No, I totally made that up.
Oh.
So maybe one thing you didn't know about me. Well, so I was going to say that I've never played organized hockey as a Canadian. Oh. So played lots of pond hockey growing up in the prairies, but never played on an organized team.
Well, do you have a favorite hockey team?
Yeah. So, living in Vancouver area, kind of cheer for the local Vancouver team. But I have to say that probably like most Canadians, every 4 years when it comes to Olympic hockey, that's the platonic form of hockey right there. That's as close as we're going to get to the pure instantiation of God's favorite sports. So Olympic hockey is pretty good.
Okay. So when did you think, you know what, I should become a philosopher?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was kind of a late bloomer academically. Started my undergrad in my mid-20s and went to kind of the local Bible college. I was a fairly recent convert to Christianity, right around the age of 20. Had just gotten married a year or two into married life, and my partner was finishing her degree. And I'm like, well, maybe I should just go to Bible college for a year and kind of just get some kind of grounding, and then go to university and figure out what I want to do. And wound up doing an undergraduate degree at Columbia Bible College, and thinking possibly of going into pastoral work. But it was already, parochial kind of confessional Bible college, fairly decent within kind of the evangelical spectrum as far as biblical studies goes. A lot of the kind of Regent College influence for a lot of my professors, N.T. Wright was a big influence. A lot of people were quoting back then. So I feel like on the biblical study side of things, they didn't do any harm, and started to kind of become aware of, systematic theologians and some Christian philosophers working with kind of theological concepts. And that was kind of the first kind of inklings I thought of, that philosophy was a good kind of resource for thinking through the Christian life. And was thinking, of going into some kind of pastoral kind of teaching work vocation, and wound up going to Regent College right out of my undergrad. And it was at Regent where I started to read Christian philosopher, and alongside theologians and other philosophers as well, but really kind of got opened up to the world of philosophy. And that's kind of where I thought, oh man, if I could pursue an academic career and in any kind of discipline, and that's really where the light went on for me to say philosophy would be something I'd like to pursue.
Mm-hmm. And what was the first thinker or first text that like super turned you on nerd style?
Oh my God, Trip. So you might want to have a beer ready for this.
Faculty.
The first book in philosophy that I read cover to cover was Richard Swinburne's The Coherence of Theism. Yeah, that's a drink deep, man. And I have to say that I'm kind of reading this book, right? And he's basically arguing that the concept of a classically theist God is logically consistent. So he's arguing against those who would just say that these omni properties can't even cohere in one being. And so he's doing his Bayesian thing. And I'm already thinking that that there are serious ways of, that he's making his argument that I just am not on board with. However, there were moments, I have this distinct memory, at least it seems to me an accurate memory, of thinking philosophy is the most beautiful prose that there is, because there was such a clarity and such a precision. And even when he would kind of describe certain parts of conceptual space, or kind of just, frame different concepts together to kind of lay out his argument, I feel like I was learning so much, even if I didn't ultimately agree with how he was putting it together, or just the prior probabilities he would assign certain things and say, well, where do those numbers come from? But at the same time, I feel like I was hooked. I thought there's real power here in that can be used for good.
Well, I won't tell you the jokes Sarah and I make when we just start to grade papers and see a whole bunch of like Swinburne. You want to guess the other two people's footnotes? We just see their numbers of reference.
Plantinga?
Oh yeah, definitely. You can guess the third?
Well, I was going to say Walter Storff, but if that's,
but aesthetics part's not that bad. Like
true.
But no, it's when someone in a philosophy, science, and religion program decides to bring up Jordan Peterson.
Oh,
but you know all about him. I'm sure you're a fan. You're a Canadian.
Yeah.
Isn't that right? That's I think y'all all like him.
Oh man. So I got introduced to Jordan Peterson about half a dozen years ago, not personally, but through his YouTube work. And I have a friend, a really great friend who never went to university but reads widely. Very smart guy, and he was saying, "Man, you got to watch these videos, these Jordan Peterson videos." And I watched one. It was kind of, he's doing his Jungian archetypes, biblical reading, Genesis narrative, Nietzsche, and then just this long kind of stream of consciousness, output. And I was about a minute in, and the hairs on the back of my neck started to kind of just stand up. And I'm like, I need structure. I need some clarity. I need some kind of, some conceptual kind of anchor points. And so then that's almost as much Jordan Peterson as I've come across.
Well, I hope you are able to go to sleep tonight with just that one little taste there.
No, I've dealt with that. That's going.
You have? Okay. I mean, everyone has their growing edges, Myron. One of the questions that I've had a couple different people send me is, what is religion? And I think that, oftentimes when you ask someone that's answering it in a discipline that is, confessionally grounded, in one sense, their own religion becomes normative in ways that, it could be for good or ill. But then when you're trying to account for something like religion, and there's no generic religion anywhere, right? There are always situated ones. How, as a philosopher of religion, do you start to frame and bring students in the classroom to a big question like that, like what is religion, where you're neither dismissing the particular instantiations of religious traditions, nor kind of essentializing one of them as ultimate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy to just abandon the project of trying to define religion. And I think so when I think about philosophy of religion, I think about particular questions that have interest both philosophically, right, connected to, and I'm coming, I'm trained in kind of the Western analytic tradition. So when I think of philosophy, I think of using reason and kind of reasoned reflection on our experience to try and understand the world, right? To try and put it into some coherent narrative, to try and look at different ways of knowing and try to look at some of the assumptions that drive inquiry and hold them up to the light of reason as much as we can, fallibly, of course, to see, what we should think is true and good and beautiful about the world. So when it comes to a philosophy of religion, then I am interested in questions that deal with those central kind of philosophical areas, but then also are adjacent to or part of the religious life. And so you can do a lot of that work without ever having to define what religion is. And I think here, one of the things that's been interesting for me too is in the last decade or so, getting more interested in scientific approaches to studying religion through cognitive psychology in particular. This 3 decades old kind of research program in cognitive science of religion has intentionally started with very particular aspects of beliefs and behaviors that have been deemed religious in some way. So it's a very kind of precise focus of study on some particular corporate worship rituals or prayer or supernatural agent beliefs or something that's very easily identifiable as part of religion in some way, even if you haven't been able to define what religion is, right? And I think that's very instructive because we can get pretty far along some interesting ways without needing to define, is there some kind of global religious system or religious belief or religious outlook or behavior in virtue of which something counts as religious? Because I think it's pretty hard to do. What do you think? How would you define religion?
Oh, well, you're asking me questions. That's not how this works, Myron. But, one of the things I tend to do in philosophy of religion is introduce a multiplicity of answers, right? But my general approach in teaching is to introduce figures, and you read fewer of them, but deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this past semester when I taught philosophy of religion, when we read The Masters of Suspicion,
Mm-hmm.
and Paul Ricoeur's response to it,
Mm-hmm.
and then spent, 3 or 4 weeks doing that, and then read Paul Tillich. And usually in class, I would always introduce other people and I just play them like, oh, I'm going to do Whitehead's theory of religion or whatever. And then you kind of build out like, then what, if you take all these theories, then you add the science in, how do these people, would they interpret or frame the science or that kind of thing? Or what about this particular practice or this particular community? In a way, answering the question, giving one single answer is problematic, but there's something gained by going, this is something that a lot of people think they need to define it because it will help them reflect and understand some dimension of human experience, especially when you're in undergrad or grad school, like you're not really going to top the masters already. So you may as well learn how to occupy their thoughts, right? And work it out. In the past, when there was, more freedom than you get in a UK context, I had students spend the semester. One of their options for their final project was to spend the semester being a faithful attendee of any religious tradition that wasn't their own. And then I just gave them a list of questions that they answered, kind of journal style through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I found to be more helpful in understanding religion. Not that they, picked up sweet vocabulary to tell their parents when they went home about their, like what they went in debt for. But if you're thinking like what a philosopher in the historic sense, like the Socrates style, like just a sheer love of wisdom and profundity that then generates like awe and care and intentionality and living, like to show up as the learner in a wisdom tradition that's not your own and see it from the outside. How do they see you as the foreigner? Right. And I even had students do it where they chose, because they're deeply religious, kind of secular humanism, and then spent, so I was meaning it in the broad sense, but yeah.
So not to continue to ask questions, but I'm curious, like as you, would read their journals or kind of interact with students, what are some of the 2 or 3 big kind of takeaways that were consistent across the student experience as they were maybe for the first time doing a deep dive into a religious tradition other than their own?
So there are 2 things that popped up consistently. One are the ways in which people that were secular or kind of allergic to the religious tradition they were born in, when you go into another one, right, that you don't have baggage in, like you're going in your neighbor's house, right? Like when your friend invites you over, then you're going to see their parents in the best way you can see them. You're going to enjoy the meal, even if you don't like the spices, right? Like you're going to go, once you take that posture and then you sit there long enough to learn it, then you go in the middle of all these rituals and stories and the meta narrative that's here and, blah, 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 blah. Like something was getting itself done that made this a beautiful family or a beautiful community or a beautiful religion, right? Like, and the interesting thing about that experience is that for people that were committed in their own religious tradition, how did they re-see how they had been blessed and situated? And for those that were without, pretty consistently, secular people either reevaluated how they chose to invest their time or re-engage the religious tradition they grew up in different ways because, and I don't know if half this is just because it's me teaching. So like, it's like very trip that comes across, but like, I didn't go with them to these things, but that's where I came to the conclusion of an intuition that we don't know all the things religious traditions do. Yeah. And one of my biggest problems with kind of reductive accounts of religion, right? And you've pointed out this in a couple of articles you said, like if cognitive science for religion, for example, explains away religious traditions because you have like, these, then like, there's a ton of other things that are happening in the culture that disappear with it, which is unrelated to its ultimate truth, right? Like whether it refers to anything. But if you're asking me like, we're really confident that human species figured out how to do the religion thing rather early on, and they've always been doing it. And it's taken different shapes and stuff. But what happens when you unplug from a tradition that frames your life, finitude, all that kind of stuff, and then let neoliberal capitalism do it for you? Like shitty fundamentalism is better than neoliberal capitalism. So,
wow, like that's a mouthful.
I know a lot of very kind yet naive fundamentalist Christians, and sometimes I wish I could be that simple. Like, anyway, but. Does that make sense? Like that, like that, like how the 2 groups interacted with it was really fascinating to me.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, I've been getting into these social scientific approaches to studying religion. And kind of my entry way into that was through kind of the work of Justin Barrett and that whole kind of disciplinary framework that he represents, which is really, let's do some experimental setups. Let's do experiments on human subjects across lifespan or cross-culturally, get some data and see what we can learn about the cognitive mechanisms that underwrite and support a variety of different religious, beliefs and behaviors, right? So there's kind of that experimental psychology side of things. And it's really trying to understand, at the species level, what is it that's going on in the meat between our ears when to support and sustain kind of the religious life cognitively. And, that was kind of the first real push in cognitive science of religion, was to understand cognitive processes. But then the pendulum kind of swung to say, well, not only are these underlying cognitive mechanisms, but there's a whole kind of co-evolutionary process where cultural concepts get transmitted across generations, and they have an impact on the evolution of our species, right? And so different kind of, cultural tools that are passed on can over time impact how our minds evolve too. And I've been reading this great book recently by Joe Henrich, The Secret of Our Success. And he really points...
It's a great book.
Have you read it?
Yeah.
You've probably interviewed him.
No, I tried to. I want to interview him about his new book. The weird book, but
the weirdest people on earth. That's on my shelf behind me, but I figured I better start with the early one first.
Why can't he write a book in 200 or 300 pages?
Because he just knows too much.
Yeah, there's an audiobook. I listened to the audiobook of The Secret of Success on airplanes back, and in traffic when I did that.
Well, so Henrich is kind of in my ears as I'm listening to you talk about these different kind of frameworks, and that we don't really know what is going on in these various kind of traditions that kind of influences us. And he points out, how you have these cultural practices that have evolved over time, and either different social groups, they just adopt them because they've just always adopted them, or when asked to say, well, why do you do it that way? They'll give some kind of answer that has nothing to do causally with actually why it's so effective, whether it's adopting certain spices that over time have been proven to fight pathogens in your area, or other kinds of things too. And it kind of made me a little more, sympathetic to things I've heard you say before, which is don't shit on things that you can't fully explain because you don't have an explanation. I paraphrase.
Well, I'm happy with that paraphrase. Tell me what you think of this. This is something I've been thinking about recently, just because, I've been in lockdown, and because I got pulled out of a lot of, relationships, but like weekly, regular in-person worship. I traveled a lot. So I got to see beautiful congregations all over the place. Like, once or twice a month I would be somewhere. And then when you go, like you talk to the ministers, you talk to people you speak to, and you're like, wow, the body of Christ is like beautifully diverse. Like most of the congregation I would visit would never hang out with each other, but they all liked me enough to have me. Right. So, and I didn't have a lot of religious baggage. So I'm like predisposed to be a fan. But I'm also like not a Christian absolutist. So I just assume other religious traditions are this cool. And like my office mate in Edinburgh is a very devout Muslim scholar, and we have a ton of common. We've talked about this stuff. So, but when I've been thinking about what happens when you pull someone out of the actual locations where the inertia of a tradition forms you in all the ways it forms you, that you're unaware of how it's doing. I'm fascinated as to what religion looks like when you show back up. Right? Like it's like the opposite of what happens now that you actually have to live with your whole family all the time. Right? So all the things about me that my family like in smaller doses, because I am a high contact, energetic person that they love to send off, and I come back and like I'm not like you really want them all the time friend. Like there's only a few people who can handle me that way, And so, but it's the opposite for your religious community. And so, I mean, someone's got to fund a giant survey on your religious practice prior, during pandemic, and after, and then see what people value, what they re-engage with, what they modified, because there's been so much experimentation. I've done 6 reading groups, and all of them are like 1,500 to 2,500 people joining, because they're like, I listen to podcasts, I can't go to church, like I'm just going to read James Cone with you. But there's a lot of people in those that never had a church they connected with where they were, but they loved the community and the singing. And anyway, that's a long.
But I think that's super interesting. And I think, like the decade post-pandemic for the life of the church, both on the ground and in the pews, is going to be super interesting to watch unfold. And you do lots of stuff to support pastors, and you've got a real kind of bent towards resourcing the church through resourcing ministers. And it'll be interesting to see what the shape of ministry is like at the local congregational level post pandemic, because I think there are lots of opportunities actually along precisely the kinds of lines that you've just mentioned, as far as just different creative ways to build community, different ways to engage in kind of teaching environments and to share life that conceptually just wouldn't have even seemed possible before we were all kind of put into lockdown and forced out of the routines.
Faculty for
during the middle part of the pandemic. If we're kind of in the end, let's just assume that we're in the end of it right now. Our own congregation was able to meet for a short time, physically distanced, capped at 50. So they would do multiple kind of iterations over the weekend to end. And I have to say, it was super meaningful just to kind of go back into that kind of liturgical structure. And then of course it got taken away again. But
faculty for
some aspects of the liturgical experience will be really, really meaningful, and I think lasting in a way that we'll be able to see.
Yeah, I'm confident the first time I have communion after
You'll
the
be a
pandemic,
mess.
I'll be a mess. And every introvert will regret that I showed up at church because they haven't interacted with people. And I'm just going to be walking around being like, with that look that's like,
yeah, they'll be like, nah, I'll just watch it online.
Let's give them a month to calm down. I kind of hope the people that were just going because they just felt like they had to go or whatever, realize they have complete permission not to go again. Because I feel like if the church lost about 30% of its members and they were forced to be creative and reconsolidate in ways, you might have more congregations where there was critical mass of people wanting to embody deeper fidelity to the way of Jesus.
But that's kind of that's been going on though for the last couple of decades or so, right? I mean, as the cultural capital of being recognized as Christian just kind of decreases, then for people for whom I don't really want to go, it's not going to cost me not to go. I'm just not going to go, and that's declining attendance or stalled kind of attendance, and maybe this is just going to really push those doors wide open, the back doors wide open to say, hey, if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here.
Yeah, it's just that in that whole thing, everyone wanted to keep every congregation, so then. Everyone gets spread more and more thin. And then when you show up and you're new and move to an area, there's it's always this a new person's here or whatever. And I feel like if you just got rid of 30% of them, you'd have better critical mass and healthier congregations. And then if the ones that are always organizing, volunteering, are those that are all the people that at a church that slowly get burnt out and disengaged because their numbers are so much fewer, they can afford less clergy. I'm like, it would be better if you all are just teamed up. There's one congregation near us that 3 churches joined together, in Edinburgh, because they were just were in that situation, and then they numerically they're now bigger than they were before because no one wants to go and be like, what are we here for? To celebrate the incarnation of the invisible God made flesh, and then they're like, oh, and there's 6 people and they probably look like they hate it, right?
So it'll be interesting. How are the mega churches going to do post pandemic?
I imagine they're going to be fine. Mega churches will be picking up a lot. I think a lot of
strays where people have just closed the doors.
It's the safest way to be a nominal participant because they have the infrastructure for all the things you want, right? Like when you're church shopping and such. One of my friends is working on a practical theology PhD right now on people that move into mega churches that have, if you just ask them, deep theological reservations. The biggest reasons are we moved into a city, right, where mega churches usually are, and they aren't planning on being there long. They want to go to church. How do you go through a whole bunch of churches that are 80 to 110 people in a big city to finally find people you resonate with? You go to a few big churches. They have children's programs or whatever, youth programs. They're love people. God loves you. Don't do drugs. And to their kids, and then they have really good music and 10 other people their own age.
Well, that's the one style of megachurch. I have this thesis that there's basically 2 ways to kind of create a megachurch. One is to kind of have they both need the charismatic speaker, they both need the good music, but then the one style has the central message of your problem is you just don't realize how good you are. You're amazing. You're awesome. God loves you, and that's kind of the central organizing thesis. The other style, of course, is your problem is you don't realize how shitty you are, and God really should hate you, but God loves you. But actually, you got to kind of really work to make sure that he does, even though it's all grace. There's no work you could do to earn God's love, but you should really try because you're really shit.
Yeah, well, it's all grace, you little shit. And you have no idea how much I love you.
That's right. Well, and I mean, both kind of messages, tap into some deep kind of psychological kind of underpinnings, right? That there's, the sense that you're not really good enough to have that authorized by your minister who's shouting it from the pulpit, with the voice of God, it really activates lots of primal kind of things.
Okay, so here's a fun question. Then how would you describe what's getting itself done in a religious tradition? Because
Right.
I feel like, there's, what's on the menu, right? But then there's like what happens when you're at the meal kind of thing. And a lot of times when you're discussing religions, you like are examining the menu. Like you walk down the street and you're looking at the menus. You're like, I don't know. I don't eat that. Right. Like, or you can usually look at the menu and decide like what genre it's in, but what happens in a restaurant is so much determined by like who it is you're bringing in with you, how the server, like so much of what happens in it, right? And high quality restaurants do a good job at creating a space to communicate something, and so you're going there for that, right? And like why I was thinking of that, well, maybe you can respond to that first, because then I'll give you like a very specific one. But I do think that there's, as a philosopher of religion, sometimes the questions people want to ask are not the ones that are most intriguing to you.
For sure.
When it goes to what is happening in a religious tradition.
I think here's a claim that is empirical in nature, but I have no data, but I'm just going to make it anyway. Most preachers who are preaching on a Sunday would be appalled if they actually had data on whether or not people were listening to what they were saying. Right. So
you think we care if people are listening? We just want them to look like it because we needed to say it ourselves.
No, I think there's a hierarchy of desires there. I think the highest desire is that people will be listening favorably and respond in some ways that will be transformative as a result of the work that you put into your sermon and the way in which you delivered it. I think that's kind of the high, but failing that, at least don't sleep, right? So and don't be on your phone, right? I mean, so that's kind of the next kind of desire down, but.
Faculty for it.
So from the participants' kind of perspective, there's the questions that you think you might be interested in, or the experiences that you think you might be looking for, if you were to articulate them. But they might not actually be the real things that capture your interest or your hearts or minds. But I think on the flip side too, there's also people who are involved in leading services and teaching and doing other things. There's what you think is going on in that kind of moment, and then there's actually the stuff that's really going on. And we've all been in services like that where it's just such a missed opportunity to do stuff that really matters.
In thinking back to the discussion of like students that when adopted another tradition and such, and thinking about it, like I was talking with a friend of mine who was discussing whether or not they should have their child baptized. Right. And one member of the couple is deeply devout and the other's like, I guess if I need to, but I'm not really sure where I'm going to end up. Right. Like, and like, is it being honest or not? And was like, Tripp, what do you think? And my initial response was like, you grew up Christian, you would probably locate yourself there if you had to. Your partner is deeply so. They want it. And like, what do you think's happening there? Right. And the answer was the very particular doctrine of baptism for that tradition. Right. And I was like, kinda, but, and this is what I would say when I was working at a UCC church in Los Angeles, that was, most of the people were new to Christianity, right? So like they're not debating theories of baptism, right? But like when it goes to like baptism,
they're not exegeting verb tenses in Koine Greek.
No, they were like the thing you do with the kids. They would even like a christening, and you're like, no, that's really not what we do. But I would say, but what I said is like each religious tradition, like within it, has a whole host of ways it shows up and provides a mythopoetic structure that teaches us how we respond to different moments of life transition in our life. And, as a minister, I deeply think they resonate with ultimate reality. But when it goes to baptism, every child, we hold up in front of the congregation and go, this child was made and known completely and loved completely by God. And we are so confident of that. We invite you as parents and as a community and the church writ large to proclaim this as we name them and claim them and respond, right? Like to the actual love of God that we know was there before each of us were born. And our goal in life is to be, as parents and as community, as God parents, people to instill the most true thing about them that comes from God. You are my beloved. And when we succeed at doing this, they will internalize this affirmation that no finite creature or word could ever shake, right? Like that's when we succeed. And then how do we do it? We say, the very place where the Son of God came to know his truest identity. We recapitulate that on each kid. Hell yeah. And, and their response was like, well, if that was what was in the doctrines, then that would be fine. I was like, yeah, but that's basically what it's doing. Right. Like, and that's what was funny to me was I'm the professional theologian, not so hung up on 17th century Reformed discussions of baptism, but as a philosopher of religion, I'm going, That's a beautiful thing. And it's part of their heritage. And you can't make anyone believe anything anyway, right? But like, if you don't have those words, when, each religious tradition does this differently, but like the church gives us an opportunity where everybody says, hey, remember what we're saying about this kid is also true about each one of you. It's one of the most revolutionary things. We got that. And then every week we hand out a meal we gave to the person that betrayed and denied us. I was like, this shit's great. You can be the biggest screw up and we all know we're affirmed. If that's what people thought Christianity was. But that's why I was asking, like, for me as a philosopher of religion, when I think about what happens in it, I think of those things and then go, but we're using all these and accomplishing this. And I don't know how they correspond to ultimate reality and finality and stuff, but it is so beautiful. I wouldn't just chuck it. And I am concerned at what happens when you don't have this big reservoir of surplus of meaning or whatever, Does that make sense? Like, that
makes great sense. And I think so the way that you were kind of just describing that encounter with parents, wondering what to do with, the kid thing, just the way, that you were providing them, you were putting flesh on that mythopoetic narrative, right? And you were framing it for them in a way that is connected to the tradition, but also powerfully a way to kind of make that concrete in their lives, both in their lives as a family, but also part of a larger community. Baptism is interesting, right? Because as a Mennonite, kind of an Anabaptist 16th century radical Reformation, I mean, the Anabaptists were the great kind of uniters in the 16th century because the only thing really that the Catholics and the Lutherans and the Calvinists or the Reformers could agree on was that they had to kill the fucking Anabaptists, right? And so, this idea that they would rebaptize, adult Christians who had been baptized, as infants on confession of their faith was something that they felt so deeply and so strongly that they were martyred for it, right? People across the disparate tradition of Anabaptism in 16th century Europe. And I think about that sometimes. I'm trying to think, like, what theological conviction would so move someone in kind of 21st century, North American, if we were, Christianity, which is my kind of context, to be able to say, yeah, I'm ready to be drowned for that, right? And it's just such a different kind of way of thinking through the importance of doctrine and what it means to one's own life, and just the cultural context was so different. I think that the post-pandemic church will embrace, those who are around will embrace kind of ritual in ways that are renewed.
When you mentioned the Anabaptist and Free Church tradition, and like my wife and I are both ordained Baptist ministers, so despite having worked at churches that baptized infants, but I feel like there's beautiful expressions of both, right?
100%, 100%, go ahead.
No, that's why I was saying, like, that's one of those moments where you look back at history and you go, like, I don't know if that's a hill to die on, right? But also, I understand that was a expression of something that is part of my heritage, right? As a free church person. And like, I don't know what would have happened if they told me I had to. I just said I wouldn't. And we both worked at the church and baptized kids, like little babies. And we were like, no, we aren't doing our own. Right. So it was awkward and stuff, but I felt like they were like honoring our,
For sure. But I think, like, so the scene that you just described, right, in that conversation with the parents of claiming this child as someone who's beloved of God, right, that makes great existential and theological sense. And it's engaging in a ritual where the primary, beneficiaries are the parents and the community, right? And the child, themselves will indirectly benefit from it by being, immersed in this community. But it's not really, about the child per se. Like the direct kind of recipients of that are the people who are involved in that ritual, right? Whereas if you think about flipping the context to more adult baptisms, the person getting baptized is more, that kind of structure is more directly for that person. Or that person's an agent in the event in a way that's a little bit more centralized. And it's not to say that one's better or worse just from that perspective. It's just to say that they have different kind of framing and different ways that you can kind of position that theologically.
Oh, yeah. And, there are different rituals in different parts of the church that play those different roles. Like a baby dedication is doing something similar to baptism in the free church, and confirmation does something like baptism in, with a fascinating thing for me, like even in that example is, and, we can go through other religious traditions as well, is what it means to be human involves going through stages as an individual and having a community that processes each one of these stages all the way till death in the context of deep commitments to each other and deep affirmations about the source of life, the possibilities and call to flourish together and things like that. And it just as a philosopher of religion, there's, in some sense, not everybody can write the perfect love poem, but when you say it to your lover and they know you mean it, everything you needed to say was said. And I think the ultimate reality is so often like that, that if you and I are in the free church tradition, I like when Elgin, my oldest, right before we moved to Scotland, I found out he was skipping youth group to go to the adult baptism class because he wanted to be baptized at the first church he went to where no parents worked at.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew I was not. I told him he needed to be at least 13. So he goes, and then I get this call from the ministers like, Elgin's come to all the baptism classes. And so we scheduled it when we went back for the wedding right after we moved.
Yeah.
And one of the big parts of that, like, is telling your own story, telling someone else in the congregation's faith story, telling the story of Jesus. Like, it's not like you just showed up and they said, yeah. And then you have to pick a scripture that is centering your own confession, right? Mm-hmm. And he picks the Philippians to him, and he comes to me and says, this is one, let the same mind be in you that is in Christ Jesus. And he goes on, and I was like, why'd you pick this one? He goes, well, I'm really not sure all the time about how all the God stuff and all that stuff works. Mm-hmm. But like, I know I want to be in a community that wants the life of Jesus to be at its heart. That's why I want to say it. And I was like, shit. Yeah. All right. Like, I feel like it was a very real expression of what you intend in that kind of beginning adolescent moment. Yeah. Right. But that happens in, across religious traditions in all sorts of different ways. But if you didn't have that whole formalized process, mm-hmm. I think I'm probably better than most parents at doing the super deep conversations, because it's like what I do all the time, Yeah. But I wouldn't have had that one, right? Where he mm-hmm. was forced to sit and wrestle with the text that shapes his form of life and is like the one he's centering himself on. And then I think, what if you weren't in a family with multiple MDivs and a PhD and like all that kind of stuff? Like, sometimes, like, mm-hmm. when I do love poems, I'm not good at writing. I write really cheesy love songs a few times, but mostly I just have to steal them. But is it stealing, right? Because what happens when you read it is true. And I just feel like, as a philosopher of religion, I just want to be like, you don't have to like everybody's love poem to recognize a love poem, but you should probably like find somebody that you can tell one to and get a little weepy on the inside,
Yeah, 100%. No, I think those sweet and palpably life-changing moments, right, that you can really only get in the context of a tradition that is formative. It's sweet. And that's when Christianity and local church congregational life is at its best, is when it just pulls the curtain back on those things that we all crave and deep, the deep longing that we have to be loved and to love others and to be able to feel like we're contributing and to the flourishing of others, as well as have others contributing into our own life and flourishing and meaning. And in those contexts, it's hard to reproduce that exactly on Zoom. Not that maybe we can get there at some point, but I have a lot of friends who are either, maybe probably not as many as you, but who are, in different stages of post-evangelicalism, is kind of antagonistic kind of attitudes towards organized Christianity, organized whatever, when it comes to religion. And, I get a lot of that. I've never been quite able to kind of go quite as far as my friends in the, we can all kind of name the hypocrisy. We can all identify, moments where church has just been really shitty. And if we're honest, and we've been in the church long enough, I can identify those moments maybe where we've contributed to the shittiness and been a part of things that, we necessarily wouldn't want to have. At the same time, the moments of beauty and sweetness and light are there as well. And I think the challenge, I think, organizationally and practically on the ground, is to be part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right, Myron. So you asked a question, derailed me, and then you got into me talking to you about what I've been thinking about, which is now I'm just switching directions because I prepared a stack of questions based on articles you wanted to talk about, and it's not hard to bait me into just talking to you. It's one of the problems of having people I'm actually friends with and like talking to on the podcast is I feel like this is a good reason to hang out. It just happened to be recording.
Exactly.
But so one of the articles you sent was on religious skepticism and skepticism in general, right? And the contrast being real important. Maybe you could introduce, like, as a philosopher, when you use the word skepticism, what exactly does that mean? What is that stance towards questions about reality, truth, and such? And then, like, what happens when that stance is applied to something like religion?
For sure. So when I think about what it is to have a belief, like most philosophers kind of working in the tradition that I'm kind of reflecting, they'll think about belief as, assent to some kind of description, assent to some kind of proposition, right? So, and if you think about how our minds form, descriptions of the world, sometimes reflectively, sometimes just intuitively, just beliefs that we have that are formed in us. Earlier, you said we don't really choose what we believe anyway, and I think that's exactly right. We just find ourselves with the beliefs that we have about the world. But if you think, well, what are these things, these beliefs? And like most philosophers, I'll just help myself, or most kind of analytic philosophers, I'll just help myself to this idea that to have a belief is just to think that some description of the world is true, some way that there is, some particular way that the world is, and we seem to be wired to adopt a kind of correspondence view of the world, right? Now, we can have discussions about whether, philosophically correspondence theories of truth make sense, or if there are problems with thinking that a correspondence account can kind of ground a robust epistemology. But when it comes to just the cognitive structures that we have, it seems like we are kind of wired to just form beliefs about the world in terms of what the world is like, and descriptions about the world in all sorts of domains, whether it's in just sensory or in areas of value and aesthetics and all sorts of other areas. So to have a belief is just to think that the world is some way. The second thing that I kind of adopt, and this is a little bit more controversial in analytic epistemology, but just this idea that belief comes in degrees, right? And so you might think that something is true, or you consider two things that you think are true, but one of the claims is something that it might not take very much for you to give it up, right? Whereas another thing that you think is true would take quite a lot for you to give it up, right? So you think that they're both true, but when it comes to the strength with which you hold them, you can kind of compare them in terms of the degree of psychological certainty that you have, right? So we're not talking logical certainty here. We're just talking psychological certainty, which describes kind of the degree of strength with which we hold a particular belief. So then when it comes to skepticism, then skepticism, as I kind of understand it, with respect to a particular belief, just happens when your degree of certainty drops below what's necessary for you to think that it's true. There might be something that you once thought was true, but now because of experience or other kinds of things that have come into play, your degree of certainty dropped below what's necessary for belief. So instead of before you adopted this thing that you thought was true, now you're skeptical toward it. So that's going to be just kind of a general a framework for understanding what skepticism is in general, right?
I think that's helpful. And maybe here's a follow-up before kind of like moving on to what you do in religion. But depending on the kind of truth, or like in my last book, I kind of talk about when you're dealing with something like Christological doctrines, there's different registers for truth. Like, and these get differentiated more in modernity, and then moving on into whatever you call our current context. So like history, the historical register, because the referent is a historical person, Jesus, and whatever happened in history around it, right? Like there's actually like a whole, the historical Jesus study, and they're like, they have their like plausibility structures and like what, right. and that kind of thing. You could understand that playing a certain role when you're doing Christological reflection, but in one sense, a collection of finite facts organized by the perfect historian doesn't like lead to image of the invisible God, right? Like because the confession of Jesus as the Christ in some sense happens at an existential register, which also has a different kind of scale. Like if you think of history, the scale is it's like a composite picture, and you can flip different things. And like, as we had more information about Second Temple period Judaism, right? Like, we reframe it. Or when we realized that Jesus wasn't a German Protestant and neither was Paul, we're like, oh, okay. And you get that going on. But then you get like the metaphysical register, because when you make the claim Jesus is the Christ, it's also about God. And then there's tons of things about the metaphysical register that, like, for sure, who the hell has certainty about any of that? Right? Like,
no, exactly. But I think one thing that I think you're pointing out is that, I mean, what is it that people are believing, to use my language earlier, what is it that people are believing when they would say that they believe that Jesus is the Christ, right? I think what you have in 12 Christians who might assent to the claim that Jesus is the Christ, they might actually be assenting to 12 different propositions because they have different concepts in view, right? Yeah.
If you had asked me the book I read for the first time all the way through and just was like,
it was Swinburne's The Existence of God.
No, it was Kierkegaard. And for me, that existential register is really important, because like when you were distinguishing between like degrees of certainty,
right?
Like at the existential register, the degree thing is not about the content of the confession, but what you give yourself to in some sense. I don't know what maybe there's a different word in more analytic philosophical circles, but like it's a performative statement, right? Like this truth calls me and creation and the world around me, gives it all back to me anew in a different place. Like Jesus says, who do they say I am? And none of their answers are not reasonable for the history. And then who do you say I am? When Peter says, you're the Christ, Son of the living God, he doesn't go, the evidence demands the verdict, but my heavenly Father revealed that to you, right? And so then he's engaged in following the way of Jesus, and that's where he discovers the content even of the confession of Jesus as Lord. And I think like one of our predicaments in our current context is that we're more and more aware of these degrees of certainty about things that play a determinative poetical center for the existential. And then at the same time, you see people with completely other theopoetics in other places with beautiful existential engagement that have unrelated, uninterested, or contradictory claims about plausibility structures around history, metaphysics, and such. And I think you should fix that for me.
So when I hear, so correct my understanding of a concept of existential truth, or I forget exactly the phrasing that you used, but the way I kind of think about that is that, existential truths are ones that, you said in terms of what you can give your life towards or what you can give your life for. And I think that that's kind of descriptive of, what we think is of ultimate significance in terms of lives of meaning and worth and value and purpose, right? Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think the strongest correlates are wedding vows.
Yeah.
Like no one gets up there lying. Right? Like, but you're giving yourself to something you don't even know what it is you're signing up for.
Right.
And then there's another element of the existential register, I think, when you become a parent, right? Where the covenantal claim is like, I promise to show up for you. Right. And you're saying it back and forth. There's this reciprocity. And then with the kid, the first time you hold your child, or when a mom like finds out that she's pregnant, right? Or usually knows it, and then the test confirms it, and they have this ongoing relationship. Like then you've been found by the kid. Yeah. And there's a claim the moment you, as a dad, when you hold your kid for the first time, they didn't do jack squat, but they already, claimed you. And both those I think are in that existential sense where you go, for me to be me in any meaningful sense, it means showing up in this relationship. And I think that's a good parallel in a sense to like, I've had a couple people when they respond to the book say like, you're the most free church person ever. But like, where I'm like, yeah, Christianity is an adult religion. But the, like when I say Jesus is the Christ, it doesn't mean like, I think I can have plausible answers, in some sense to the history and metaphysics or whatever. And then I shift plenty of doctrines enough to be a heretic but that's real different than the form of life question because you've located yourself somewhere. Does that make sense? Like,
no, 100%. But I think like the way I would kind of just crank that through my own mind is that there's nothing like it's not an either or. And I think it's actually a both and in the sense of the things that really kind of move you on the existential register are also importantly bound up they're adjacent to, and in some ways importantly bound up in things that you actually think are true about the world. And in fact, it's hard to know how you could have authentic moments that move you on the existential register without entailing that you think some things are true about the world. Like think about that moment where you're holding your child and your child hasn't done anything for you and yet they've claimed you, right? And you are being formed into a certain kind of relationship by passions and perspectives that you have really no control over. But alongside in those moments are a whole host of for lack of a better word, propositions that you think are true about the world, right? And you don't get to even control them. They just are kind of formed in you. Think about, relationships that you've committed to that have been of existential significance to you. But when they go sideways, right? When you come to learn truths about the other person that are in fact ones that dampen the existential register, then, it's not like you have to pick one or the other. And I think in some ways, what is going to appeal to different habits of mind is to be able to take a step back and to try and understand the existential significance by kind of parsing it out in terms of concepts that you can kind of think, well, does this get things right or not? Right. And so I wouldn't necessarily kind of just say it's kind of one or the other. And I certainly wouldn't reduce. And I think this is a fair criticism of analytic philosophy of religion, or for a lot of Christian intellectuals who have adopted analytic philosophy as the be all and end all. I think it is a fair criticism to say that the existential significance of and in some sense, foundation of experience that makes, the pursuit of, life after Jesus and community worth doing is ignored by a lot of philosophers who just want to focus on the doctrinal weeds, right? And so I don't see those as being in conflict. However, I'm going to say though, like for a lot of people, the question, well, okay, but how does what you say all fit together, right? Or how does what you're claiming is of significance in the Christian life fit with what I know of modern science or what I know about other things? Because when I look at the Christian landscape, there's lots of different really shitty answers to that, right? And so what I think is also true is that for a lot of people who are invested in I don't know if invested in kind of mythopoetic narratives is the right word here, but I think sometimes the question of, well, how does it all fit together? Why should we think that it's true, if at all, is a meaningful one that I think you have to kind of, you don't want to jump to the apologist toolbox to say, well, we can show you why it's meaningful, and we can with a high degree of not just psychological certainty, but intellectual certainty. I mean, I think that's a doomed project, but I think the challenge is to try and have meaningful conversations across lots of different goals and try and recognize and parse out what those goals are.
So one of the things that comes to mind to me then is, and for me, I feel like if you just take the Christology example, like all three registers are really important, right? So, I mean, I guess that's why I wrote 2 books about it, was it is because the existential one's important. I also have no interest in saying things that I know are bullshit, right? Like, yeah. So in both books, one for a popular artist, one, in an academic one, like the academic one is like built on a metaphysical picture that I think is preferential. There are certain claims in it that are just like most metaphysicians would go with. Other ones, there'll be like, that's problematic. And I'm like, yeah, it's because you're wrong. Right. And then there's probably some commitments in it that, the generic philosopher of religion is going to be like, what in the world, Trip? And I'm like, yeah, but it's true. Right. Yeah. Right. And I'm just like, you don't have a reason it's not. And I don't have a clincher, but I think the aesthetic appeal of my conclusion is where I'm going, and so like that degrees of certainty thing. Yeah. When it goes to something like historical awareness or whatever, or metaphysical reflection and that kind of thing, are like in the context of, your peers as academics. Mm-hmm. But
so here's a question then. So when I think about my own views, there are very, very few claims that I would really, bet a lot of money on, right? And there are lots of things that I think are true about God and the good life.
Okay, but which are the ones that you would bet a lot of money on? That's what I'm really interested in.
That naturalism is false.
Okay, but how do you define naturalism?
Well, just this idea that the entire world, universe, life, and cosmos can be explained and understood without appealing to something outside kind of the pure kind of natural world of cause and effect. So I think some version of a cosmological argument is, I don't know how to refute it. Okay. Other than throwing my hands up and saying, well, there are some facts about the world that just have no explanation whatsoever. And that seems to me to be too much of a pill to swallow, right?
I don't know. I have a lot of people I know that have successfully swallowed that pill, Myron.
Sure. I mean, there's lots of ways to swallow the pill. I can't do it, right?
Well, here's so the cosmological argument, for example, here's my 2 thoughts that pop into my head. One, when I read Charles Hartshorne's version of it, which I'm sure is not going to surprise you, I was just like, obviously. And but also I inherited a very analytic philosophy of religion class, and I read what we're supposed to be like like the best versions of it. They suck. Yeah. I know I'm not an analytic philosopher of religion, but I just want you to know that I would rather have assigned Anselm and Descartes, because 2 things. Anselm, the ontological, like the OG, right? Unless you count Indian philosophy, but we're in the UK, so we don't. And
unless, except for those bits they want to appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. They're in our museums. So, but sorry. It wasn't personal. But
it was a little bit personal.
Okay, it was. I'll make a JTF joke next. That way, everyone's upset. Anselm, half of his thinking book is prayers. He wrote it because his brothers, other people that took the vows, asked him about it. And it's based in a form of philosophical reflection. Yeah, that's devotional and spiritual in nature. Yeah. You know what the original version of that was called? Confessions. Yeah. And it wasn't confessing to the I know not what. It was confessing to God. So, but you take that. Descartes. I read so many papers, and I basically told people, I was like, I don't think you've read Anselm or Descartes, so you should not footnote them. Descartes, he actually thought you should go do the meditations. Yeah. I don't know, they're actual meditations where you do meditations. And I've read enough papers by snotty conservative evangelicals who I think have never thought about retelling their own life and doubts to God in the form of precise yet doxological reflection, nor thought, how about I actually do philosophical meditations and then see what attends in this space that I cultivate. And then they're like, well, I guess now that Plantinga and me have figured out the ontological argument. Now, therefore, neo-Calvinism. Yeah. Anyway, you got, I'm saying, they're when you give that, when you're like the thing ontological argument, I'm like, yeah. But then I always know that if I say that, it might trigger those people to be like, well, Tripp's on my team. And I'm like, ow.
So just to clarify, I was saying that I think that some version of a cosmological argument is true, right? And not so much ontological. But I think no, you're fine. I think ontological arguments are interesting, and they can get us into some good space in modal logic. But so when I was a grad student at Purdue, one of my professors was
like when you went streaking at the Notre Dame game.
Yeah. No, actually, okay. So here's a true story about Purdue Notre Dame. I have a good friend who was doing his PhD in theology at Notre Dame, and he's currently a religion scholar at Baylor, Paul Martins. And Paul Martins was at Notre Dame, and I was doing my grad studies at Purdue, and we got to go to a Purdue Notre Dame game at Notre Dame. And we were sitting in the Notre Dame student section, kind of in the bottom third, and it was a pretty close game. And I was only cheering at appropriate times, like during the national anthem, during timeouts,
Because it's a national anthem.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, no. And I had resolved in my mind, because I think Purdue was leading in the fourth quarter, and I had resolved, like, should they win, I was going to turn my head up to the whole sea of green in front of me and just, give them the finger with both barrels and just let the hate kind of rain down. But probably in God's providence, Purdue lost and my life was spared. But that's
do you think that Purdue would have won if your planned response was streaking?
Yeah, that's right. There are many possible worlds in which other counterfactuals of freedom are true, and God knew that. And so,
if we want to fix your hang up on the cosmological argument, the multiverse actually ensures that all of those universes exist. Yeah. So,
which is why Swinburne says that a theistic multiverse is more probable than an atheistic one.
Yeah, one of the things that in one sense, I'm like, what is the secular version of the Thomist mind of God?
Oh,
like it's essentially the multiverse. And I got snarky in class one, and I was like, I was trying to figure out what the difference actually is. Like if you just were to formalize it logically, because anyway, like I'm not sure that there is. And then I was told, well, no, that's just the Everett's version of the multiverse. There's this other one, and I was like, all right, whatever. Like okay, do you have another? Since apparently I can't differentiate. You obviously know how committed I am to proving God's existence. When I heard cosmological, I was like, did he say ontological?
Yeah, that's right.
Ontological one's the only one that's kind of interesting, just because I've just never thought it was. Is it they called arguments? If we could call them something else, what if you called like the cosmological, like
way of being in the world,
or just like call it the cosmological mystery or something, where you're just like, this is a really good question. And the question holds open the door for a multiplicity of forms of life and such, but you're just like, don't give me those shitty reductionistic ones. Yeah. Because it's just too,
Well, okay. So on the one hand, so this is the blessing and the curse of precision, right? On the one hand, I mean, the great thing about parsing through ideas and intuitions and kind of organizing them in some kind of premise and conclusion format is that you're able to kind of hopefully be clear on what a person is saying and what's being claimed, and then kind of have an interesting and productive discussion about whether you think this is true or why it's crazy, or whether conclusions that people are drawing from other things that they think are true, in fact, follow, and in some sense, how does that go? So that's a real benefit of that kind of discourse. But one of the downsides, though, is that it can kind of give the illusion of certainty that doesn't follow, right? And so, or it gives the illusion of being comprehensive in scope in ways that actually don't reflect that you've actually ignored a whole set of other interesting and important questions. But
I think that there's a tendency in analytic philosophy of religion, and then the theologians that get really into it, to see
names. I want names, Trip.
Oh, that's probably not going to happen. Or they'll get edited out. But where, let's say, these philosophical challenges, and you can just a big one like religious pluralism, or like the philosophical challenges to the reality of God, or whatever.
Oh, just the metaphysics of the incarnation.
Well, that one's not that hard. But where these big questions to the plausibility structure of then Christian reflection are things that get settled before the constructive theological activity. And part of that's because of how the disciplines relate, right? Like,
So by that, do you mean when you say like settling questions around the plausibility structure, saying these are kind of the rules of the game. This is going to be what counts as acceptable or not acceptable, and it's going to kind of follow these kind of rules. And then once you've kind of had that discussion, then it sets you off on a certain kind of discourse that's actually it ignores the fact that there are other productive kinds of discourse, or it just actually pulls you away from the kinds of discourses that might actually be of more significance theologically.
Yeah. And so, like, in a sense, those questions, which you recognize as important, are settled in your kind of philosophical prolegomena to then when you do theology. Yeah. And I understand why because of how analytic philosophical reflection functions. And then, you can
but you do the same thing though. Like it's just, you just do it in a different key. I mean, you have your own kind of set of criteria for what counts as a good plausibility structure. And that's part of your own theological prolegomena. And that kind of shapes how you do theology. And it's not like you're not doing the same thing. It's just you're doing it maybe differently.
I don't know. I've not read an analytic theologian whose last chapter is God might not exist if these things aren't true. And it's all based like the carrying the questions that challenge the plausibility of God into doing theology. Maybe Catherine Tanner, if she counts. Mm-hmm. And I brought this up with a lot of theologians. They almost all have this maneuver where by the time they're doing theology, they have bigger allegiance to their tradition, their like whatever their confessional locations are or whatever. And so then as philosophers, they keep debating things that a lot of philosophical constructive theologians just have stopped arguing about. Like, and this is why I was like, why it popped in my head in the skepticism article on religious skepticism. Okay, so I ran this conference for 40 mainline Protestant theology professors. So like probably people that taught about 80% of the mainline Protestant graduating divinity school professors in the United States. So of the 40, what percentage do you thought actually believed in a God with two omnis?
15%.
That's about right. And then philosophers of religion act as if like the people training the ministers actually even think these things. And then they go on debating it. And then you talk to, this has been my experience talking to my philosophy faculty friends who aren't religious. They just assume since I'm a minister that I believe these things, which I'm like, actually, no, I actually agree with you. And so like my plausibility structure, I'm like, if you believe in omnipotence, I am an atheist. Like I just will be one. I'm glad to be one. In fact, if an omnipotent deity puts me in heaven, I'm going to ask to go to hell because he's a piece of shit. And it's definitely a he. And I don't want to be there. Definitely not worshiping it, and like I'm not odd. Like but mainline Protestant. So like how does that go ahead?
So like here's one way of telling 20th century and 21st century theological and Christian philosophical history, right? And this was kind of the narrative that I was kind of introduced to through my own introduction to philosophy through Christian philosophers and the Society of Christian Philosophers, right? So the story goes like this. Kant posed a big problem for theology, and post-Kantian theology really tried to get into the grips of how theology could be meaningful if there is this big rift between the noumenal and phenomenal, right? How does theological discourse have significance? Then along comes the big bad positivist movement, which poured rocket fuel on the Kantian embers and really put kind of the academic discourse of theology into a tailspin, trying to figure out, well, it might not even be false, right? It might not even have any real kind of assertoric content for theological statements. And that's even, pushes theology right into the abyss that Kant opened. In the grips of trying to respond to positivism, academic theology kind of embraced more continental approaches of language and meaning and discourse, more openly embracing kind of metaphor, kind of not really going the route of trying to match kind of the positivistic criteria for meaningfulness and just, putting out ways of doing theology where it could still be meaningful, but not necessarily in the same kind of descriptive kind of way. So then you have this kind of trajectory of post-Kantian, post-positivistic theology that was kind of set along that trajectory. Then in kind of the Anglo-American tradition, positivism dies, right? The death that it deserves. And you have, people engaging in kind of a resurrection of philosophy of religion. And you have this whole multiple generations now of philosophers of religion, many of whom who are kind of operating from a confessional kind of standpoint, engaging in theological questions using kind of the tools of kind of classic systematics and analytic philosophy. And that's kind of shaped the discourse in the academic philosophical kind of worlds. And you have these parallel universes, right? So you have generations of theologians now engaged doing theology in ways that look so different from the way in which philosophers of religion have been doing philosophical theology. Yeah. So it's not surprising to me. So that's why I could say, I'm probably about 15%. I don't know. I was just kind of throwing a number out there, but that's, yeah.
Yeah. And the two things I would say, like in continental thought, there was a whole return to religion on a different means, right? So
for sure.
Remind me to go back to mainline Protestants, but I love the historical sketch. And so I'm interested in how these two observations I'm thinking about like connect to it. And then what you think as someone who like obviously wasn't indoctrinated in liberal Protestant philosophy and religion discourse. So the return to religion in continental philosophy.
So just as on this, like I will take to my grave this image of J.I. Packer, from whom I took 2 courses at Regent College, uttering the phrase "demon Schleiermacher."
Yeah. And I did Lectio Divina through the Christian faith, if that helps like differentiate like what
I
think. And Schleiermacher, in America is not understood. Karl Barth, who actually was a good reader of him, but performed an antagonistic relationship to make some points.
Right.
Then gets internalized through the whole post-liberal movement with which you mentioned earlier, the linguistic turn, right? So later Wittgenstein then gives us so we basically agree with Kant. We're just not talking to him because it's all about the form of life, the language system and such gets up. But anyway, the continental philosophy, the return to religion is really different than the Anglo kind of version of the emergence of analytic theology and analytic philosophy. And it does so with the reshaping of philosophy of religion in continental tradition after Kant. So for the continental tradition after Kant, this is like the 3-sentence version of an hour-and-a-half lecture. But after Kant, the continental tradition said, like it's above our pay grade to talk about God. So what are we going to talk about now? Well, religion is a human thing. We can talk a shit ton about religion. We know that it's there. It does things. We care about ethics and we care about culture. You know what high-minded liberal people care about? Ethics and culture. And they love being in charge of discourse about ethics and culture. As you can see, Tripp's post-structuralist suspicion creeping in. But like the continental tradition has this move where the philosopher of religion really just stops talking about God. The analytic tradition just keeps doing it. And redoes it in new ways, right? Positivism. The continental tradition just keeps going, why are you talking about that? It's above our pay grade. Right. And it's precisely because the continental people think we can never talk about God really anyway, that they then come back to God. Yeah. And because they're trying to talk about, in a sense, the way the structural other makes demands on you. And this is the entrance of aesthetics, of morals, of value in the continental tradition. And then then the bigger question in the contemporary moment, especially where someone like Paul comes back, is what do we do where there's a one world order, in a sense like capitalism? How do you imagine the human subject that we flattened from Kant on? Like, how do you give back the human subject in ways it's not already determined by what used to be religion and is now culture dominated by capitalism? How do you have a subject that isn't already formed by that? Paul, why is he interesting? No longer under the law. A new subject comes into being, right? So they go back to Jacob Talbus, Heidegger, before he became a philosopher, his lectures on phenomenology of religion, all these things where the militant subject, the one who in faith goes into a different form of life that is contrary to the world, contrary to the law. Like, think of you just rereading religion. All of a sudden, they're like, oh, junk. And then you get something like Derrida's doing, like when he does his own autobiography, Circumfessions, he has all these analogies in his life to Derrida and Augustine, and then he retells it. And he ponders on Augustine's big question, right? Like, who do I love when I love my God, right? Like, and he recapitulates it to go, like, in a sense, that whole return to religion is to go, the reductive account of the world, human being that Kant gave us, doesn't work for being human. Religion had something going for it, and now we'd like to resist the dominant form of culture again, namely capitalism, post Cold War. What is another world possible? We can think of zombies more than we can think of the end of capitalism kind of move, right? And so religion becomes interesting because religion now, the religious believer, is an example of someone whose identity is actually heretical to the global domination system. That was like what turned me on. So then when like you show up and read analytic philosophers who are just like, I have a new version of Kalam's ontological argument. And you're just like, anyway, so like there are definitely two. I would love to figure out how you bring those two together and mutually benefit, because I'll say being forced to read, and forced, I mean, like I was paid a lot of the analytic stuff, like the detailed things you're mentioning, I really like I really care about it. It's just sometimes the community and people are not like, maybe I just don't want to hang out with them as much. But if it was you, but maybe does that make sense? Like,
but I think maybe you're comparing like really sweet apples with shitty rotten oranges, right? And the sweet apples being the sweet apples being the best of the continental return to religion that the masters that you've read across the canon and beyond, and then you're comparing that to some student's paper attempt to kind of make some kind of very minute kind of claim, right? Like. It would be an interesting paper to write, like kind of the post-positivistic return to religion and analytic and continental perspectives, right? So, and I think on the analytics side, so have you ever seen, we mentioned Walter Storff in passing before, but when Plantinga retired, of course, there was this big conference at Notre Dame in his honor, and Walter Storff kind of gave the wrap-up address, and he was tasked not with writing a philosophy paper, but just to kind of give a historical kind of overview on Al's significance, right? So he gave this really great talk called Philosophy, Then, Now, and Al. And it's all available on YouTube and video. And basically, he just, tells kind of the history of analytic philosophy in general from his own vantage point as someone who kind of came through his undergrad, post World War II, right? And, he identifies Plantinga as writing kind of 3 game-changing books, right? Or making kind of 3 game-changing contributions in philosophy, in metaphysics, philosophy of religion, and epistemology. And on the philosophy of religion, right, he's talking about God and other minds, and basically saying that, post-Kantian, post-positivist, and positivistic philosophy, there was no way to be able to talk about God. And Al, through God and Other Minds, kind of said, well, actually, there's a coherent model according to which you can, right? And a lot of the objections that came out of Kant and came out of the positivistic movement, by the rules of their own game, couldn't stand, right? And so then that kind of opened the door to this kind of tradition where the theologians worry that talk about God as above our pay grade didn't land, right? So I can see how, in the same way that when analytic philosophers read Heidegger influenced theology, right, it's just like, well, what is going on here? This is such a different type of discourse that I can imagine that you have a similar kind of feeling going the other way when you're in a different stream.
Oh, I definitely think that's there. Right.
Yeah.
And because they're supposed to be in the same class or doing the same thing is where the confusion comes, right? Like, it's only because you said you were like, when a neo-Calvinist that's like hyper masculine is like, I'm a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I lose my shit.
But you should.
I know. But if he was just like, you know what I love? And I'm like, what do you love? He's like, testosterone. It's a jewel of the gods. I'd be like, I believe you. It's only because it was saying you're doing what I'm doing. So I had never read Plantinga until I was supervising classes that were supposed to read it. So in the last year and a half, I've read. Here's my thoughts about it. Is I say something like, "That's interesting. I guess that could work." Not animating. And here's the part I can't figure out.
Yeah.
I know lots of churches that their minister loved their professor who was really into Plantinga, but they listen to the podcast and invite me.
Yeah.
Right. So this is like the animating part. I know that there are plenty of people that are at least 1 degree of separation from someone that's like, I love Plantinga. Right. Yeah. And then they're like, I love Trip. I don't see the dots, but right.
Well, so, but then you're talking to someone. I love Plantinga and I do love Trip.
Yeah, but you like me probably for different reasons, No,
the Venn diagram of reasons why I love both those people, it has a significant amount of overlap.
Yeah, but have you told Plantinga that you're going to go dancing with him next time you see each other? Because
I have not. Okay, I have not said that.
You can opt for karaoke if you want, either one. But here's the thing: in some sense, I wonder what you think about this question because I have thoughts, but I'm not invested in the cognitive science and psych stuff. Do you think whether that's interesting or animating would correlate to personality tests? Because I only think this just having taught in California, in the South, and in the UK. And if you said, Trip, what's the over under on the 30 people in this class?
Right.
Turning in a paper, even though they know you're uninterested in it.
Right.
And you worked so hard at trying to be generous when talking about it, a paper on Swinburne and Plantinga. I'm pretty sure after about a 5-minute conversation with anyone, I know who's going to write that paper.
It would probably be less than 5 minutes, probably be about a minute.
Yeah. You're like, what do you want to talk about? They're like, wow, it's just so anyway. Yeah. But do you think that there's a correlation
for sure.
For the animating part?
I think that's probably right to some degree. I think that's certainly, but at the same time, it's easy to kind of jump to quick kind of stereotypes, right? So Milbank tweet on analytic theology is the Brexit wing of theology, right? So we have different social media groups, but
I enjoy figuring out what gets Milbank wild.
Yeah.
On Twitter.
So
that's like small. That dismissiveness of analytic theology is really small compared to basically anything I'm interested in.
Right.
Nothing. But I guess the only point, a queer metaphysics of becoming, and then he's just
So the only thing I wanted to say about that was that my Facebook feeds and other feeds were filled up with people who were with feminist analytic philosophers and different queer philosophers saying, like, fuck you, Milbank, basically, because the way that he was kind of describing and putting that analytic theology in a particular box was not lining up with their own kind of lived experience. But so can I tell you a couple of takeaways from Plantinga that I think that might resonate with you? Or let me just share.
I was surprised that I didn't hate it. Like it was like watching the what was that movie series Elgin made me watch, where Vin Diesel rides around in cars a lot?
Oh, Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, like I don't care about cars. Vin Diesel. Right. And
he's surprised. Do not dismiss the Diesel. He's got chops.
I don't want to dismiss the Plantinga. They kind of are very similar to me. Like I understand that there's an audience that this like really works for.
Well, but so the first Plantinga I read, like for a lot of people of my generation, maybe, is Advice to Christian Philosophers, right? And so this is kind of his inaugural address when he moved from Calvin College to University of Notre Dame, and the bullet point takeaway from Advice to Christian Philosophers is to say that it's perfectly intellectually acceptable for a Christian to approach the whatever intellectual task, but certainly the philosopher's task with, Christian philosophical and theological commitments, right? I mean, as your starting point, you don't have to, like, everyone comes to their work with a certain set of kind of pre-philosophical intuitions. And unless you can be, shown that those are mistaken in some important way, you're perfectly within your rights to proceed from that basis. And so there's a real liberating kind of perspective there for if you're thinking that that's not helpful, right? So that's what's to argue with that.
Nothing. I really feel like continental tradition is much more immediately accepting to the situated and contingent nature of all knowledge and claims, like in ways that,
right?
Like,
well, okay. So that would be an interesting conversation, actually, to say, okay, so to what degree does what Plantinga is saying in Advice to Christian Philosophers, is it similar to, but distinct from, continental approaches to the situatedness of knowledge claims, right? Because I think that there's some similarities, but I think there's some differences too, and it would be important to tease that out at some point.
Oh no, I think it's important. I was just meaning like, I was giving my like reference point to it, especially like if you took the archetype analytic philosopher, who's not religious, which is like most of the philosophy faculty I hang out with currently.
Yeah.
Which they then project Plantinga at me all the time. But one of my biggest problems with them, which comes up in every time we're in a conversation, where I'm just like, I could not imagine being smart and confident enough to make the sweeping statements you make. It just seems like above, finitude has really crested in your confidence. Like give me an example.
Give me an example.
What kind of example do you want?
Like of Plantinga making a sweeping claim?
No, not Plantinga. I'm talking about like devout materialist analytic philosophers.
Oh, right.
Like, because like I get Plantinga's point, and if my conversation partners with them, I would say what he said.
Right.
But my part of my frustration when I talk to him, I'm just always like, okay, so the head of our philosophy department, which I know she's not going to listen, but she was struck because of my deep affirmation of same-sex marriage as a Christian minister, and she's like very analytic, not interested in religion at all. And like we started having this conversation.
Yeah.
And when I asked if I could redo part of the philosophy of religion thing because it doesn't fit what we're doing, because it's connected to multiple schools, I was like, we need to introduce more continental stuff because a lot of philosophical theologians engage it. And then she was like, well, what are the biggest perks of that? I was like, well, it include post-colonial, feminists, and I start listing off all the things, that'd be great. Now, in conversations, basically it's like, we know a lot of the people that do this are prejudiced or inclined towards certain positions that are, uncomfortable for them. So she's like, this is a religious ally, right? But then we had a conversation in a different context about philosophy where I was just like, and this was a analytic paper on the nature of perception. Now, I have like a deep suspicion of sensationalism, namely Hume's thinking of like the human as a black box and our only access to the world are as sensations, and a deep commitment that it's really, really wrong, and was happy to list off scientific studies that I think demonstrate this as problematic assumption. And the best account of it is that what we call senses are kind of second order explanatory discourses for are fun, like a way of understanding. I don't want to go into like a long thing, but like how an actual entity experiences itself in the world. And I gave a number of examples and things, and I get how our philosophical logic was working. I don't like this for this and this and this reason. And I just said, yeah, but the way you use the word perception, anytime you come up with a concept that's definitional for a discourse, it simultaneously hides as much as it reveals. And what you're hiding is the part that I think I'm uncomfortable with. It's not what you're articulating. It's the closure underneath it rather than the reservoir underneath it. And she's like, what do you mean? I went into Heidegger. And then it was like, but how does this relate to science? And I was like, well, Deleuze, like, and it went back and forth.
The rhizome?
I didn't say rhizome, but he talks about hard and soft science. Anyway, and so like, and then after it, we went out. We talked for a long time, and she was just like, okay, I get what you're saying. Like, but she needed to make sure I understood her first. Then says something like, I don't know what it would be like to be a philosopher animated by the questions and suspicions that animate you. And I'm not, and I know you aren't animated by them because you want to sneak God on the back end, right? Because she's seen me advocate in other places for other things. Like when I'm thinking of that like continental analytic thing, just thinking of it in this context where I get the suspicion of simultaneously thinking it's really cool to read Foucault and Heidegger. At the end, they're like, and he works for Jesus. but the point you made about planting and stuff, like, it's one way in that kind of discourse just to go, what is being revealed in a discourse is as important as what's being hidden. And when it goes to your a priori or situated or the plausibility structure you engage in any reflection in, like one of Plantinga's observations is like that a certain set of prejudices are popular at this point in history and other ones were popular another one. Like somehow those collectiveness have like an a priori commitment to finality and closure. So we should just not, like, that part just seems like immediately obvious to me.
Yeah, but I mean, there was that caveat, which is to say that unless you can be shown that, those starting points are mistaken in some important way, and it strikes me that what the continentalist would say is like, yeah, that's above everyone's pay grade. We have our starting points, and we just have our starting points. But I could be mistaken about that.
Well, I mean, I guess it really depends on who you're thinking of. But I think we could say that like there are more or less plausible starting points, right? Like so. Yeah,
but is that so? Like you've used the word plausibility structure and you just use the word plausible. Now, I guess who gets to define plausibility, right? And what are the criteria for determining whether one type of narrative is better or worse than the other, right?
Well, and I think that like once you ask a question like that, and this is something I really enjoyed.
So like that, it just seems to me like that question just kind of jumps off the page to me, right? As something that's important to have a conversation about, because as soon as you start, because otherwise, it's nice work if you can get away with it, which is to employ kind of a set of normative criteria without having to kind of articulate what those normative criteria are, right? And so the question of normativity is an interesting one for me as I think about continental philosophy, because I think that there are interesting ways of thinking about normativity that might be different from how that works kind of in analytic philosophy. And I think there might be some ways of thinking that through in dialogue that could be mutually beneficial to these traditions.
So here's kind of an example of what I was thinking about. Well, not recently, but before Multiple Children, I was in lots of bands. And when you're going to put together your set list, like you have like
wait. How did I not know that you were in bands? Of our friend group, I thought Dan was the only band guy, but you were in bands.
Well, no, I'm not going to bring it up because I'm also competitive, and he
kicked your ass in the band world.
Yeah. Like I'll tell like the story. My band opened for a band that he toured with, right? Like he played Warped Tour. I can't compete about it. I'm just going to ask him like, how many millions of downloads did your podcast have this year? Like I'm just going to ask something like that. But
so how did I not know that you were competitive?
You haven't gone dancing with me yet.
Oh,
yeah. Or karaoke.
So I thought on the dance floor, you'd be like all about the landing on the existential register. But
hell yeah,
you want to fucking win, man.
No. I'm confident that my pride is small enough that I can humiliate myself and invite everyone into enjoying it, such that it returns to me as affirmation.
Yeah.
And but when I was in high school, I went to art magnet school. And then in college was started as a philosophy and musical theater major. But like from middle school on, I was a theater person.
Yeah.
And so I took swing dance lessons for a year competitively so I could get the lead in the musical, The Boyfriend, which I did. And I was like, there's only about 4 people at this school that if I learned to dance, like could do it. And I don't have a problem with the high A. Others do. I can hit the A that's necessary for this part. If I learn to swing dance, game on. Game
over.
Yeah. So that was my. But if you're picking a set list, right? Like,
right.
You have like some songs you have to play because someone in the band's favorite song. Other ones like they're popular or going to work, or cover songs like Kick Ass or whatever. But like there's this like whole orchestrating thing. And if the setting, like a battle of the bands, or you only have this much time, or whatever, leads to like the wrong question to start setting up the set list, it changes the whole thing. Sometimes, like, my response to your concern about plausibility structures is not like those aren't ultimately important, but when a philosopher who has a non-normative for your guild commitment, which at one point was religious, like antagonism or atheism or something, but now isn't. If that's the context, then you put the wrong two songs up front. If you want to win the wallflower by the end. I'm not saying you don't like address those questions. I'm just saying like how you kick off the concert. Like, when is the first point you hit a big song and then drop it? There's a whole science of doing this. And I think so many times philosophers forget that everyone's human and that like what is persuasive and stuff. And so then you get like defensive and you're like, fuck this. We're going to play our like the one single that college radio was interested in for 3 months. And we're going to play it first, last, and in the middle. And then everyone that's listening that's trying to decide if they like you are like, oh my God, they're going to play a song again. What's that song? Look, you just can't be prejudiced against us because we believe in God. I like syllogisms, blah, blah, and it's not that you aren't even doing good things. It's just that it like the vibe it gets is bad.
But vibe is very subjective, right? And I think that
I'm not saying it's not subjective. I was just saying, as someone who is simultaneously I don't know a lot of Christians that are more deeply committed than me, and like when I read analytic philosophers of religion trying to justify themselves, like I always have this like, you put the wrong song up front. Like if you were just like, do you know what also I can do? 3.5 minute pop love song that by the end you are singing the chorus because it's so good. Right? Like, and you're like, oh, that's not that bad. And then you tell like the song of like existential angst where like in the mundane existence, and yet you all know we're fucked, but you don't want to admit it. But somehow the song like does it. And you're like, yeah. And then you're like but the reservoir of all meaning and existence is beautiful, true, and good. You're like, okay, but because I resonate with those other songs, I might believe you. But if you start with that one and you're just like, this is my favorite song, I hope you like it, I'm going to play it 2 more times. You're like, nah.
So what you've done is in a nice way, do what I think other continentally inclined theologians and philosophers like to do in a not so nice way, which is when they're presented with a question about, well, what are your criteria for normativity, or what do you mean by plausibility? Like, what counts as better or worse? They will often say that's a stupid question. Right.
Well, I don't think it's stupid.
No, but what you're saying is that maybe it's maybe the wrong question, or understanding the question needs to be put in a different kind of context than or in a different order in a set list, maybe than what you're presenting with.
Well, yeah, like certain questions get answered at different points. But like earlier, when I was talking about the prolegomena thing, I think when in reference to the philosophical theologians that were at the conference, like there's a shift to the questions are now included in the process of doing constructive work, where then it's not like you've left them metaphorically off the set list. They're just like, you're going to touch on this when you're doing it, and it frames how you're trying to do your constructive work. It's just answering the accuser's question is not the conditions for confessional reflection, right? Like, and
did I just become the accuser?
No. I meant like the hypothetical. Like, I always feel like conservative Christians sit around like secular people really care what they think,
right? And
are really disturbed they don't agree with them. I think they just hope they don't ruin their kids. Like,
100%.
And then like fuck the world over because they keep electing Donald Trump. Like, like I don't think they really care because they don't believe you're smart. And then if you come at them and you're like, well, what about the Cambrian explosion? Or like, well, we may not have a literal Adam and Eve, but well, there is a possibility that a female is the like
we have mitochondrial Eve.
Yeah, like all that kind of stuff. We're just like, what the hell's going on right now? And underneath it, the suspicion, as someone who didn't really like, I'm not really like a good at being a supernaturalist Christian. Like that's not Tripp's like vibe. Is that so many other people are just sitting there going like, I feel like you're using a bunch of syllogisms to sneak Geneva in on the back end.
Okay, but lest we shouldn't conflate fundamentalist conservative Christianity with analytic philosophy of religion or analytic theology, right?
But don't you think like the over under, right?
Well,
like
for sure, but I mean,
there are people that are comfortable signing faith statements to work in positions of fundamentalists who they're comfortable enough with that crowd to teach their kids while nuancing hermeneutically like a continental philosopher those faith statements.
Well, I think that a lot of so I think for maybe,
I imagine this isn't the same in Canada. But
well, maybe this is what is accurate here. Like there are conservative Christians, fundamentalists in lots of different kind of academic pursuits, and maybe they're disproportionately represented in analytic theology. I don't know if that's true, but it seems like it could be true. But that's not to say that like I know a number of philosophers and theologians who are self-described, analytic philosophers of religion. And when they do philosophical theology, it's in an analytic sort, who are most avowedly not fundamentalist in any kind of recognizable way, are looking to use kind of analytic modes of discourse and tools to address questions related to, social justice, LGBTQ, value and dignity and significance, feminist themes, all sorts of other. I just would want to say, like, we can't kind of just reduce one to the other. I mean, even if historically, and in maybe some of the circles you travel with, it makes sense to kind of identify the two.
So Pamela Sue Anderson, okay.
I assigned one of her books in my philosophy of religion class.
If any of the things I submit to analytic philosophy, research gatherings, almost all of them, I basically use her as a justification for everything I'm interested in. and because I'd like message most of my friends, all these people are into analytic philosophy of religion. Like, what are y'all talking about? And like, she was the person most of my tribe reference. She has a couple articles on rethinking through feminist philosophy of religion. And the whole time I'm just like, yeah, well, that's what me and all my friends do all the time. Like, and underneath it, her biggest critique is when we say philosophy of religion in the Anglophone world, what we really mean is particularly situated discussions of the Judeo-Christian omni deity, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and then her response is like, whatever's going on in religion is something that doesn't necessitate essentially your syllabus being determined by Aquinas and friends.
Right.
But it is something we really need to discuss because she's in a sense advocating that like religion's a real question to keep asking, even though so much of the philosophy departments just start like shoving that class off to people that have, whatever prejudice and such, or they're dismissing it and these kind of things. And she goes, no. Like, here's what you don't get as someone who's like, very established, prominent philosophers. Like, if you're even a monist, right? Like there's only one thing in the world. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about meaning and value and beauty and goodness, then you're going to have to capitulate whatever this like physicalism is again. Mm-hmm. And you want to know how humans have done it forever? I'm not saying you have to do it this way. It was called religion. And in fact, the history of philosophy is full of philosophers who weren't that religious that figured out how to do it. Let me tell you about my friend Spinoza, right? And she goes through and I just like whatever that opening is, that's the equivalent for analytic philosophy. At least I'm not like set around doing it a lot, but like that energy is the return to corresponds so much to the return to religion in continental thought. Like, what do you think about that? Because like I've probably read more of her than anything in the last year, just because I was like, oh, great conversation point. And then I come up with ways I can assign it to connect to different things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that sounds, I'd have to think more about it. I mean, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was wanting to diversify the readings that I would have my students read in philosophy of religion. And so I teach 2 philosophy of religion courses on a regular basis. And one is called Reason and Belief in God. And the other one is called Suffering and Belief in God. So I threw kind of a question out on social media for people who were wiser than me to say, and I'm saying, look, I'm wanting to kind of include, different readings. And Pamela Sue Anderson, Revisioning Gender and Philosophy of Religion, was highly endorsed by a lot of my friends. And so I'm like, okay, let's do it. And so I assigned it for my students. And so that's really the only deep dive I've done into her work, sadly to say. But I assigned it as a book review, and we had a couple classes on it. It was a little bit more challenging for my students to read, other than a handful, just because while she certainly engaged a lot of kind of the more kind of traditional analytic figures, which we'd also read in other parts of the course, she kind of packaged it in a way that was a little bit more challenging for them to get a grip on. What we really appreciated as a class was that there was a significant payoff. And in that book, I mean, just the way in which she illuminated how in kind of classic systematics and in the way that analytic philosophy of religion has kind of evolved in 20th century and beyond, patriarchy is the air you breathe, right? And the ways in which, gendered concepts directly and indirectly are present and influenced in philosophical and theological discourse in ways that are harmful for everybody. I mean, just illuminating that was very powerful for our students. And so one of my students in that class said, well, so the idea here is that, well, that God has no gender, but if he did have one, right, it would, and that's kind of the position that she's critiquing or illuminating and critiquing, right? So there's kind of the subtext, which is to say, oh yeah, no, we could all agree that God is not gendered, but if he did have one, we know which one it would be, right? So.
Oh yeah, I had I was at a church where we finally introduced, where the liturgy for each week was either fully non-gendered or equal gendered language. Yeah. And if it leaned towards one, it had to have more female energy than the other because, the penis got the first 2,000 years. So,
which is why it's convention in analytic philosophy to default to female pronouns in generic discourse. But nonetheless.
Yeah, because it's so funny. Just the writing code, is offensive to certain people, and you're like, look, it's just how you have to do it when you turn in. You can write it with all the patriarchy you want. Just add an S, turn it to an it or a they or a God self, whatever is less triggering for you when you look at the graded version. But, and I'm just like, I don't really want to read your 1,200 word screed about why this isn't reasonable. One of the things about her work that struck me was how much the locus of the problem for her is connected to divine power. Yeah. Yeah. And you brought that up. I realize that this is the second half of my one question about all the things I read prior to this. And we're like almost 2 hours, I guess, into talking or something.
We're over 2 hours. Yeah.
Dear God. All right. So sorry. And
not sorry.
Well, no, I really love you. I love talking to you, which a signal that I like the person more as I talk more in the interview and acknowledge questions. So, in the question on the article on religious skepticism, and then and you bring up omnipotence again in the anti-theism article, and I'll link to these in the blog post for anyone that's listening that wants to check it out. How from your own Mennonite location, which is obviously doesn't think God's joking about the love the enemy bit, it wasn't well, psych. Do you then show up in philosophical context where the majority of your peers are not deeply Mennonite and have that peace church thing? And not that all my family is, but my parents definitely are, right? So praying for your enemies was a family activity. And that's just so different. And you don't know it's different until you meet other people and they think that it's you get to go to war without praying for the people your country's attacking. So there's a certain part of the peace church part of the church that problematizes a hot topic, let's say in philosophy of religion, and then related to the skepticism or anti-theism. Both of those ways, that question shows back up in different ways. How have you negotiated that conversation and thought through it, especially someone that came to faith in the midst of your intellectual journey?
Yeah. We haven't known each other for that long, but I think that the way that you talk about your own Christian life and the causes that you're involved in related to real world issues of justice and the way that you speak against different, I see you exemplifying a lot of the peace church kind of traditions and values that I try and adopt and aspire to, but I think you're doing it more consistently. I think for Mennonites in particular, those who have gone on to work in kind of academic spheres, what it means to live out, identifying and articulating kind of how you are conceiving of the gospel in a peace tradition that what tries to speak against the powers, while at the same time, those of us fortunate enough to be in the academy, you have these incredibly kind of privileged positions, and we are involved in the machine of late stage capitalism in many ways, like everybody else, right? And so how to kind of reconcile that. So I think when it comes to trying to connect that to my own academic work in different kind of circles, I think trying to speak truth to power in ways that are for good. So a friend of mine used this turn of phrase that I've used before, and it kind of really resonates with me, which is to say that we are never more like God than when we use our own power and privilege to the advantage and lift up those who have less, right? And that's something
Amen.
that
Amen. That's a high quality amen moment.
Yeah, right.
I don't if you aren't even sure God exists, you can still say amen.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. And I think, and so I think like trying to embody that in different ways, so whether it's in academic partnerships or in questions that you think are worth pursuing, and to try and kind of be an activist in that way, trying to make your place of employment a better place, that's more just and equitable for everybody. I am in awe of, and I'm in genuine awe of a handful of people that I know who are just so passionate about justice that it consumes them, but it doesn't defeat them. Right. And so, they use their considerable intellect in a tireless way to write and to advocate and to work to make the world a better place. So I kind of tune that maybe in an Anabaptist way to try and identify which problems are worth solving and how to go about doing that. But that's not, certainly Mennonites don't have the corner on that. And a lot of times, historically, they've done really bad at it. But I think that, those are the people that really, I think we need to lift up and to celebrate. And I put you in that camp.
Well, so one of the things that a lot of people regularly ask what good is this question?
Right.
And I don't know if this is, I can't explain why I frame it this way, but when I think of like someone like you who gets students each semester showing up in their classes, and this is true about regardless of what grade or place you teach. So just an educator.
Right.
Or a parent who gets like hands-on investment in some person. Like anytime you have a formative role in a person's life, you get to deteriorate or contribute, lift up or, tear down some particular expression of the image of God that will touch thousands of people in their lifetime.
But that's true of any person in any personal exchange. Am I right?
Yeah, no, that's why I'm saying, like, I think part of like what your attentiveness about thinking about like, what you do with the different roles is so important to like frame. Like, it's easy to minimize one's own agency if you think the only thing you have agency over is what you say or do, basically.
Right. Oh, totally.
But
yeah.
Like but in one sense you are responsible for what you say and do, but you're responsible to other people. And so like, be it, there are thousands of people who listen to this conversation, and then they are connected to thousands of other people, right? Or if over time as a teacher in any situation this happens, or as a parent, you have an intimate role in a few people, but their whole life will be shaped by what you do. There is this sense that the vision of cultivating minds that ask and are disturbed by the right questions, the ones that I think something in a sense we share, the questions that are suspicious of privilege and power, the life-giving possibilities of joyfully, not regretfully and resentfully, handing on those questions and tasks, like, can make a huge difference. And that's awesome. I don't know, like, just thinking of how much fun it would be to be in an explicitly Mennonite context doing that. Like, what's your main jam, right? Like the Mennonite Stairway to Heaven. Like if you're Led Zeppelin, right? Like the Stairway to Heaven is like, love your enemy. Can you like, who the hell when that song's done goes, I don't know if that would actually make things better. Nobody. Like if everyone enjoyed Led Zeppelin 4, the world would be a better place, the Mennonite version, like the world would be a better place. Like, and I feel like that, the forming of selves animated by something like that is.
Yeah. But so here's the great thing about, the great thing. So there's a way of telling kind of the Mennonite story that's pretty self-congratulatory, right? And
you have to name drop the book that you recently edited around, Anabaptist thought.
Yeah. So recovering the Anabaptist vision, where you kind of recovering from the Anabaptist vision, which was a collection of essays that grew out of a conference I hosted at Trinity, where we had different kind of Anabaptist theological voices critiquing different ways in which kind of the Anabaptist identity had been forged, particularly in North America post World War II, and the way that was kind of amplified by John Howard Yoder, who for decades was kind of the only Mennonite intellectual of international significance, probably. And of course, his horrific kind of way in which he was discovered to be a sexual predator, and kind of the house that Yoder built kind of collapsing in different ways. But even apart from that kind of congratulatory way of sweeping over problems and damage to kind of glorify a person. Just even in Mennonite denominations, there's kind of a way of patting oneself on the back to kind of point to conscientious objectors who resisted kind of the war machine, or to tell the stories of kind of Mennonite migration from Europe, and kind of the typical way of telling Mennonite migration stories is to say they were persecuted, they moved into a new place, they prospered, they were persecuted, they moved to a new place, they were prospered, right? And so, but when in fact, what you see in lots of these migration stories, particularly there's an interesting scholarship coming out of, the ways in which Mennonites, these peace church, peace loving, supposedly Mennonites were fully on board with kind of the National Socialist project in emerging Germany, and thought, actually Hitler's going to make Germany great again, right? And so you see a lot of ways in which, the allure of political stability, the allure of in-group, out-group, and kind of folk identity, and kind of the valorizing of that in ways that you see, strikingly similar in North America as these people become very, very wealthy, very invested in the status quo, and also really buy into lots of the standard kind of ways in which evangelicals have kind of bought into power structures too. I mean, it's the same for Mennonites, right? And so on the one hand, we come from this tradition where and maybe every tradition is like this, but you can kind of pick and choose how to tell your story. And you kind of lift out the good things, and I think that's part of the challenge for Anabaptists more broadly, and Mennonites in particular today, is to how to parse out the praiseworthy aspects of the tradition and use it to critique, speak truth to power today.
Oh, that was great. Okay. So, all right. I have one question and an invitation.
Okay.
And we did 2 of the 17 questions I wrote down.
All right.
But
we didn't get to any of my questions.
Okay. So you get to ask a question and then I'll give my invitation, because my question is actually an entire new topic. So you can ask any question you want and we'll discuss it. But then I want to give you an invitation at the end. That's
all right. Okay. So if you could recommend one thing from Plantinga that you think every Christian should know, what would that be? You don't have to answer that today. You can mull on that.
No. Okay. You want the snarky response or the heartfelt?
Is it an either or?
Yeah, they're different. But okay, the snarky one is brilliance takes many forms. Right? Okay. The heartfelt one is just because it's called philosophy doesn't mean there's not genres. I have some friends that are deeply into Swedish death metal. Yeah. And I mean really into it in uncomfortable ways. And they also are happy people, which considering what they listen to. And when I listen to them, I'm like, oh, yeah. And then the other day, one of my neighbors that's very like an Irish guy into Swedish death metal, and one of the other neighbors who's Irish guy into 90s gangster rap, which I'm very familiar with, but not a drunk Irish neighbor singing said 90s gangster rap.
Yeah.
Like that's its own enjoyment, and I have a hard time not giggling at him. But the genre thing I think is really important, because genres in certain aesthetic, once you recognize it as an aesthetic thing, means there's a lineage, there's a history, and to understand the beauty, you have to know it. But if you just are like I think rap's stupid, you're like, well, how much rap do you listen to? I listen to this one song. You're like, you don't understand. Right. But then like if you went back and listened to Kool and the Gang in a vacuum, you're like, this is good. But if you know the history, you're like, oh, right. Like, and I feel like Plantinga is one of those, like, if you're completely off put, one, you just know it's not your genre. And two, you haven't even invested enough in the genre to recognize that they're at least good at it. I think that I think of Plantinga as like the Three Doors Down of philosophy. I don't like Three Doors Down. I don't like everything about that entire genre of really depressed, somewhere between like real grunge and shitty acoustic guitar used in real grunge, but with like too poppy of a chorus. But like that one Superman song isn't bad. Right. And I can figure out that I completely understand people that paid money to go to see them in concert. I'm not, but that's not like a valuation of the content. It's more of an assessment of the situation.
Yeah. So, and I think this like the particularities of the situation, I think are important. Unlike Nickelback are like the neo-Calvinists, where there's actually not a situation as beautiful. You just keep telling yourself it is. Right. But if you get off the tee, because 20 million people can't be wrong, can they?
No, they can. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's one of the gifts being a philosophy major gives you is confidence when telling large numbers of people they're wrong.
Well, you said something earlier about Plantinga being in response to a particular conversation, or he had certain conversation partners in view, and I think that's exactly right. Like for someone who's a newly minted PhD in the '60s, who is trying to articulate some kind of space for God talk and for religion more generally. I mean, he's engaging in a certain set of questions that were significant at the day, and that a lot of people still find significant to kind of contemplate and think about, and he's kind of addressing them in a particular kind of way. So I think and I think you're exactly right, like understanding kind of the genre, and I think everything that you said charitably about Plantinga in that respect, in terms of understanding the genre and also the context for it, I think is also true of continental philosophy and continental theology, right? I think and that's something probably that, Myron 20 some years ago wouldn't have been quite as inclined to say, but I think, I learned a few things over the years to say that there are ways of talking about questions that might not be my preferred genre, but I think are able to kind of pay attention to the context and trying to understand the language. And you can see, it actually, and like every language opens up new conceptual space, right? And so there are some things that you can't get at in analytic discourse that you can in others, or at least not as easily. So I would agree with that.
Well, I really love you, Myron. I'm really glad we're friends.
Likewise. Wait till we go dancing.
Yeah, well, it happened. I don't know.
What? Trip, you win. All right. So when we go dancing, I'm just going to tell you right from the outset, you win. So it's not a competition that you have to kind of feel any kind of.
Yeah, but you act like I was worried about winning with you. It's the people present.
Right.
Okay. So, here's my invitation. I think this would be fun.
Yeah.
You say no, I'm going to edit this whole thing out of the podcast so I don't get turned down in public. But pick any of the Socratic dialogues.
Okay.
Right. So you pick any Socratic dialogue.
Yeah.
Or the question at the heart of a Socratic dialogue.
Yeah.
Right. And then we each pick an article or chapter.
Yeah.
That turns us on.
Yeah.
About that question. Right.
Yeah.
And we lean into the archetype version of ourselves. Right. So, like, 100%. I'm not picking the one I want you to read.
No, you're picking the one that does the most for you.
Yeah. Right. And so then we'll say, like, what is justice?
Yeah.
And then, like, we each pick 30 pages. We both read it.
Yeah.
Here's my idea. We make all of our friends, our mutual friend group.
Yeah.
We tell them, like, look, we're going to do this. Then here's what we do. The other one has to give a 7 to 10 minute spiel on the other one's reading selection.
Love it.
All positive statements.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so we have to play what we think the other one once said. Like, why did Myron pick this? Right.
Yeah.
We're reading the Republic. What's justice?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm fucking planting or whatever it is. Right. Like,
yeah.
You perform the idea of the article. You perform the idea of the one I get. And then we don't ask questions. We only respond if they're interested in what we say. Oh yeah, that's my idea.
Let's do it.
Because I feel like one perk of knowing that at least 3 of our friends will say yes to anything we ask is some weird creative public philosophy gimmick like this.
Totally.
And what every philosopher will claim?
Tell me.
Socrates.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, that's like a Christian being like, we're going to discuss the parables of Jesus. But that's,
that's totally out of bounds.
Yeah. That's more complicated. But if we're just like any question that Socrates asks, but you get to pick the question. So you pick whatever question Socrates asks, but then the other one has to perform this reading selection. And now we don't have to put this part on the podcast, definitely. But of our 3 mutual friends that will participate in this, which ones do you think will actually read it?
Sarah and Siri.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I think that Dan will Google it.
He'll watch some video, maybe.
Watch a YouTube video.
Yeah.
And have more confident opinions about it. Sari's questions will be more related to, like, how she thinks the conversation would go better. Right? Like, her contributions will be like, oh, I think this is what Tripp and Myron were trying to get at.
Right. Or she'll ask the question that will evoke kind of very kind of interesting interpersonal kind of spaces. Yeah.
And Sarah will probably perform what she thinks is the thing we wanted to argue about in ways where her own opinion is the obvious solution. That's my like anticipation.
Which is fair. No,
I get the anytime you get to be the third way. Come on, Mennonite, you know what that means.
Yeah,
exactly. Don't you feel good like when you get the offer? Like, so basically, what you're asking me is to be the third way. Yeah.
I look forward to that, man. That's gonna be great.
Okay, well, You just put in our group chat what the Socratic question is, and then we can come up with a reading. But that'd be a lot of fun. And mostly, I just want everyone to know that Myron is one of the few people in my life that's like quantitative blessing or cursing value is just so high on the blessing that it's uncomfortable.
Well,
I wouldn't be sane. I wouldn't be sane at the end of this lockdown. Scottish lockdown's hardcore. I would not be sane if you didn't exist. That's high praise and back at you. And I think that the esteem that I have for you and your work and all the different things that you do is just off the charts, man. So I look forward to the days when we can travel and be out of lockdown and we can express our love to each other in person. I know. I look forward to having awkwardly long man hugs, dancing, doing karaoke, and
maybe even another movie premiere.
Oh, well, definitely. And I mostly want to, and this is definitely when I'm going to turn off the recording. I want to have their hot, smoky Mennonite sausage.
Oh, I got loads for you.
I know. Next episode, Myron's on. You'll learn how to make your own hot, smoky Mennonite sausage. But until then, philosophize by yourself. Smoochy boochies. I told you. Myron's like the number one Mennonite Canadian I know. And then if you were just like to think of all the Mennonite Canadian philosophers in the world, like he dominates. So yeah, I was really glad you got to meet Myron. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you too have that fond feeling of our favorite Mennonite Canadian philosopher friend Myron, then share this episode with someone you think that would like it. That'd be awesome. Because sharing is caring. And when it's the brew, it's the best you can do. And that rhymes. So, yeah. Bye.